Hello, welcome back to Life Enrichment with Hank Ballinger. Today I want to discuss 3 easy ways to buy property. Now, I know if you have no property, it seems like a really hard stretch to think that you will ever own many pieces of property. And before I got started, that's a hard concept to grasp. But I want you to know anybody could own a lot of property. Now, recently I put out a video that talks about if you are in debt, you need to get out of debt. But once you get there, and you can get there, but once you get out of debt, you can start accumulating property. So today I want to talk a little bit about property and how you can get some pieces of property in your name. Very important. So first of all, I would like to thank all those who have been watching the channel. I appreciate you watching, and very nice. And hopefully something we say and something we show you on our whiteboards, it can show you and inspire you to go out and become Redneck Rich. So first of all, if you're going to buy property, you're generally going to need some money from the bank. So again, there we go. We go back to you have to get out of bad debt. Okay, once you get rid of that bad debt, a lot of those student loans, credit cards, those debts that are keeping you poor. Once you get away from those, then you can start accumulating some property. Well, when you go to the bank and you say, hey, I want to get a loan. So a lot of banks will tell you, well, okay, if your credit score generally over 700, then they will look very favorably as to giving you a loan. So if you go to the bank, they'll say, well, we will put up 80% of the money, but you have to put up 20% of the money. Now, I tell people a lot in my classes, when I give wealth building classes, I ask people, I say, why do people rob banks? Because if you rob a bank, you go in with a gun and you try to get money. You may get a few $1,000s. Banks generally don't keep a whole lot of cash. Most things are done electronically. So even if you got a few $1,000s, you could spend the rest of your life in prison. You can't build wealth in prison. So if you do the right things, you can literally go into the bank and ask them for millions of dollars, and they will give it to you. So why rob the bank? Just go in and ask for the money, and they will give it to you. Up to 80%. You only have to put up 20. Sometimes they'll do an 85-15 split. So you only have to come up with 15%, and they will go 85. So generally speaking, though, they'll do an 80-20 split. So let's say a house cost $100,000. If you go to the bank, they'll say, well, we will put up $80,000, meaning you're going to have to put that on a debt service with the bank for 20, 25 years. Most banks won't go 30. Most local banks won't go 30 unless it's a primary residence. So if this is rental, they won't go 30, but a lot of them will go 25. So they will go 80,000 of the 100,000, and you will have to put 20,000 out of pocket. You'll have to put that down. Now, where do you get that 20,000? Well, you could get it, you could come up with it, you could save it, or you could use what's called investor capital, meaning you get it from somebody else. Now, Robert Kiyosaki and many others call it OPM, or other people's money. Very important that you learn that lesson. You are not limited to only the amount of money you have. Now, once you learn that lesson and you realize all the money in the world could be at your disposal, at that point you realize you are not very limited as to buy property. So investor capital, who is the investor? Well, it could be anybody. It could be Aunt June. It could be Uncle Danny. You don't know. Who is the guy? Who is the woman? Who is the group that you may borrow this money from? It could be anybody. So investor capital could be anybody, could be a relative. So if you tell them, hey, I need $20,000 to buy this, or maybe you have $10,000, you only need to borrow $10,000, could be mom and dad. Some people have even put the amount they have to put down on a credit card. Don't encourage it, but I'm not saying you can't do it. It has been done. Now, if you borrow that from a relative or from an investor, then you're going to have to pay them back. So you got 80% of the loan you're going to have to pay back to the bank with interest. And you may also have someone else that you're paying with interest over a 5, 10, or 15, 20 year amortization, or 15, 20 year span of time that you've got to pay them back. And they're going to want interest generally on that money. So you still have to make sure, do your due diligence, make sure the property is still going to cash flow. Now remember, cash flow is when you take all of your income per month and then whatever you have that you're paying out, whatever you're left with, that's cash flow. Make sure the property, if you're going to have two loans, one with a bank and one with an investor, make sure you're still going to get cash flow. If you're not going to get cash flow, especially if you're just starting out, don't get 100% financing, 80% from the bank and 20% from an investor. Don't do it, because you're going to find out that as you're trying to pay that back and you're pulling money out of pocket every month, you're also going to have a dishwasher go out, or you're going to have a water heater go out, or you're going to have a roof needs repaired. You're going to find out that you're going to be under. Your payments are going to be greater than your income. You don't want to get there. Now, who else could be an investor? We're looking at ways you can get money. You can get 80% many times from the bank. You can get investor money. Now, in anybody, I don't care where you're from, especially in continental USA, if you look up on your phone, just hard money lenders in your area, your phone will show you hard money lenders in your area. Now, what's a hard money lender? This is somebody that what they do is they loan money to somebody on projects just like this, and some much, much bigger. Now, they will generally require a higher return of interest, whereas a bank nowadays may charge 6 or 7% interest. Hard money lender may charge 8, 10, 12, maybe 15, depending on the terms. So if you're going to use a hard money lender, I'm not against hard money lenders. They are not loan sharks. They're not going to bust your kneecaps up. They're not going to break your leg, but they will charge you a higher interest, and they want their money back very soon, maybe 6 months, maybe 12 months. So hard money lenders are a good way to get a loan. But many times you will have to pay them back quick. Not saying don't use the money, just make sure if you have one part of the loan with the bank and the other part of the loan with hard money, make sure you're still cash flowing every month. The money you bring in, you have enough to pay all your debts. You pay the bank, you pay the hard money lender, you still have money left, or don't do the deal. Now, these are various ways to get money. Okay, now we want to look at getting the property itself. There are many, many ways, and you could look up on your smartphone, many ways to get property. Now, I encourage everybody to start getting a portfolio of property, of real estate in your name. Now, why do I keep telling people you need to get real estate? Real estate is now, has always been, and will always be the best asset class ever. It's better than gold. It's better than currency or dollars. It's better than gold or silver. It's better than anything, T-bills, bonds, notes. It's better than any asset class. Real estate is the pristine collateral of all time. You want real estate in your name. It'll make you wealthy. So let's talk about some really simple ways to get some real estate. Well, first of all, there's the fix and flip. Now, let's say you had this same instance. You had this house. It's a $100,000 house. The bank says, well, we'll give you $80,000. You say, well, I got to come up with $20,000. So you look at the deal and it's going to make sense. You can charge maybe $1,100, $1,200 a month income on this house. So you buy this house. You got a payment with the bank, but you fix this house up, and maybe you put an additional 10 or 20. So you initially had 100,000. So you put an additional 10 or 20,000. Maybe you fix the house up and total the amount you have involved is $110,000, $120,000 involved by the time you have your fixes. You then turn around and sell that house for $150,000. Well, if you had 120 in it and you turn around and sell it for 120, you just made $30,000. That's pretty good. You could do that several times a year, possibly. Now, especially if you're a handyman. If you want to get redneck rich and you're a handyman, you're kind of ahead of a lot of the people in the pack. Because those who can't fix it themselves, they're going to have to hire that part done. If you can do it yourself, if you figure yourself a handyman, you can be way ahead of the pack. You get the sweat equity, whereas the person who has to pay somebody else for the sweat equity, they lose the sweat equity. You get that. So the fix and flips, I really encourage a good way to build wealth in short little bursts. Every time you sell a house, you're going to get a certain amount of additional income. Now, I do want to say there's going to be some tax implications, and that's short-term, generally short-term capital gains. Meaning you bought that property, you fixed it up, and you sold it within less than a year and 1 day. If you buy it, fix it up, and sell it in less than a year and a day, your short-term capital gains is going to be more than if you kept that property more than a year and 1 day. Not saying don't do fix and flips. I like fix and flips. I'm just wanting you to know all the ins and outs before you buy a fix and flip. Fix and flips is a good way, if you're getting started, a good way to build wealth. Let's look at another one called house hacking. Now, house hacking is a great way to build wealth. I want to look at it a few different ways. One, you could buy a house and rent part of that house out to somebody else, maybe the basement, maybe an upstairs room. Maybe you could seal it off, basement or the upstairs, the attic. Maybe you got a room that you could rent out. It's called house hacking. It's a very good way. Maybe you already own the house, or maybe you buy a house and you're going to live in it, and you rent out the upstairs or the downstairs. Very, very good way to build wealth. Let's look at another way. Another way is called the BRRRR method. I like the BRRRR method. One is it costs you some time, but if you will follow this method to the letter, you can really build a lot of wealth really fast. And the more aggressive you are, the more wealth you can build quicker. The BRRRR method says you buy a piece of property, you rehab the piece of property, you rent the piece of property out, and then you refinance that piece of property, and then you repeat this whole system again. Now, let me show you how that works in theory. And really not in theory, many people have done this. So let's say you buy your first piece of property, and let's say it's $50,000 house. Now, $50,000 house is not the Taj Mahal, but it's a very nice. And in many areas, especially like where I grew up in Jackson County, Kentucky, $50,000 house, you can buy a house for that. Now, let's say you buy that house for that, and then you put $20,000 of your own money into fixing it up. But after you do that, you have $70,000 in it. But now let's say you have the value of the house at $100,000. Now let's look at a few things. If you bought a $50,000 house and put 20% down, well, if you put 20% down on a $100,000 house, that means you got to put $20,000. If you put 20% down on a $50,000 house, that means you put $10,000. $10,000. If you got a part-time job or an additional job and worked your way up to saving $10,000, you could do this very trick. You could do this. You buy one house, Once you get this house, you pay $50,000, you put $10,000 down, 20%. You now have a $30,000 loan with the bank, and you put maybe $20,000 in the house to fix it up. Now, where did you get that $20,000? Sometimes people have it in their pocket and they fix the house up. But some people go back to this same bank they just got a $30,000 loan and say, listen, I can make this a $100,000 house. Would you give me a construction loan when I get the initial loan, the $30,000? Will you give me a construction loan of $20,000 so I can fix the house up? And then once I get it fixed up, then I can consolidate it all into one loan, and you give me a loan against the house up to 80%. So now you would have $70,000 in the house. It would be valued at 100. The bank would loan you 80% of the value, which means they would give you $10,000. It's called a cash out refinance. So you refinance this, you get $10,000. Well, what did it cost you to get this house? $10,000. Well, now you're pulling $10,000 out of this house that you could buy the second house. And then couldn't you just repeat this process to get the second house? And then when you buy the second house and rehab it and rent it out and refinance, then you buy the third. Then you do it again and you buy the fourth, and you do it again and you buy the fifth. I had a buddy that did this very same thing. Did the very same thing, had very little out of pocket on the first house. He ended up with about 10 houses. Then he traded those in, just like Monopoly, 4 greenhouses, trade them in, get 1 red hotel. He traded them in, sold those, and then bought a 20-unit apartment building worth about $1.5 million. It's a pretty good deal. The only money out of pocket is right here. You could do that. So here's the deal. This is called daisy chaining. You buy one, you take the equity from it, buy the second. Take the equity from it, buy the third. Take the equity from it, buy the fourth. Take the equity from it, buy the fifth. How much money are you out of pocket? Only the amount out of pocket on the first one. So for $10,000, you now have 5 houses worth $500,000 that you're gaining equity on every month that somebody else is paying for, and you're out of pocket $10,000. This is called daisy chain. Now, if you can do this with houses, couldn't you also do this with apartments? Which is exactly what I've done. And if I could do it, you can do it. This is a very good way called the BRRRR method. Works very well for you, for me, for anybody. Anybody can become Redneck Rich. Just takes first some motivation. Become motivated. Go out there. Be willing to work. Be willing to be aggressive. And then 2, get moving. Get moving. Nothing ever happened by sitting around. Get moving. You can do it. Again, I'd like to say thank you for everybody who has watched the channel in the past, and we're going to have upcoming episodes. The next episode will be on creative financing. We've gone over financing here just a little bit today. Now, this is called conventional financing. When you take 80% from the bank and you put 20% out of pocket. Now, we've got a little creative today, meaning we talked about investors. But when we talk about creative financing, we will talk about literally possibly buying property with zero, nothing, not a big goose egg out of your pocket. So tune in the future for creative financing. Thank you very much.